Going live in 3, 2, 1, cue.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. You are tuning in at IIUM TV live with Political Insights, 40 minutes of political knowledge. As your host for yet another episode, my name is Ilya Marsha, and today I have here with me our newest addition to Political Insights.
My name is Alia Daniel, and stay tuned with us for another episode. And while you're at it, don't forget to comment, like, follow, and subscribe to IIUM TV on Spotify, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, our latest platform, which is LinkedIn.
And also, as you know, Alia is our latest host. So to test her somewhat knowledge, we will pose our first question to Alia today. So, Alia, have you been up to date with the latest news for the past few weeks?
Of course, being the good host that I am, I have been up to date with the Malacca elections, period spot checks, among others. So, what about you, Marsha? Have you been up to date?
Of course, I have been particularly interested in the 2022 budget proposal. So, to discuss, as you know, political insights is furthermore discussing on political knowledge. Tonight we will be presenting or we will be discussing on the 2022 budget, navigating Malaysia's recovery.
Yes, I have been following on that too. So on the 29th of October, the Finance Minister, Tengku Zafrul Aziz, presented the budget 2022 during the parliamentary session. So the budget has covered the governmental allocations towards various sectors that does not only affect us here at Political Insights, but all of you too.
So to discuss further about our topic tonight, we have a very special guest with us. So tonight we have Dr. Lau Zhe Wei, who received his master's and doctorate degrees from the Malaysian University and also the University of Bristol, respectively. So he is currently a political science lecturer teaching here in IIUM and has been politically active in the journalism field. So welcome, Dr. Lau.
Welcome, Doctor.
Hello, Masha, hello, Alia.
So how are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thank you.
So very good to hear that, Doctor. So to our audiences, if you have any questions, please post it in the chat box and we will address it during the Q&A session at a later time. So to get the ball rolling, let's ask the first question. So Doctor, so what is the basis of the framework for the National Budget 2022?
According to the Finance Minister, the whole budget for next year is basically to be inclined towards recovering the economy after the pandemic. So they're trying to focus the whole elements into recovering back the economy of Malaysia. Whether it is successful or not, whether the problem and solution is matched or mismatched, there will be another debate. But that's the intention of the government of the day.
All right, so we know, as we know, it is for, it is our priority to recover the economy and also many other sectors in Malaysia.
So I believe that recovery is like a very important thing, especially post COVID-19 pandemic. But you know, how is this national budget 2022 any different from the previous budget of budget 2021? What are some of the improvements that have been made in this particular budget? So please, Dr. Lau.
First of all, the very clear improvement will be in terms of the presentations. Like last year budget, they have a lot of controversial terms or controversial clauses in the budget, like the JASA and so on. For this year, if you realize, almost very few to none of the controversial part. One of the simple reason is basically the opposition politicians are quite less vocal in terms of criticizing it. Very simple reason is because they have already signed the memorandum of understanding MOU, meaning they are directly or indirectly involved in drafting the budget. Therefore, if you realize, their voice is quite low. So that would be the first part, in the sense of it is more presentable and it is less controversial. But whether the budget, is it a good budget or is it a bad budget, and to compare to last year, I would say that, of course, it's slightly better in terms of you have the opinion from both sides, but it's still quite a conservative budget conservative in the sense of a lot of the elements traditionally or conventionally are practiced, they still continue it. Instead of coming out with a really solution-based proposal towards the budget. Because there are a lot of things that due to political considerations, they cannot ignore or they have to do it. But these things are not necessarily useful or not necessarily helpful in terms of pushing the economy towards the front, especially in terms of recovering the economy from the pandemic. So I would say that this kind of standardized or conservative way of doing the budgeting does not really help the country more. Of course, it wouldn't be controversial because everybody will be happy with that. But I don't really see it as being helpful at this moment of time.
So they are way less like controversial. So we don't know yet if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think we will discover more later as we go on forward with our questions for the night. So Alia would like to pose our next question.
So our next question for you, Doctor, is how much has the pandemic of COVID-19 impacted the direction of the national budget?
Of course, for this pandemic, right, the whole budget is basically inclined towards this direction in the sense of to solve back the economy suffering at that time. But my curious is whether the budget itself can really help the whole economy or the whole Malaysian society. If you realize the budget for this year and the budget for last year, it more inclines to solve the problem only for a small segment of the society. I wouldn't say small, but at least only for some segment of society, but not overall. If you realize the budget for this year and the budget for last year, they are giving a lot of focus towards the B40 category. I'm not saying that it's wrong to help. I'm saying it's correct to help them, especially in terms of cash injection, because that is the most direct way to help this category. But what about M40 and what about T20? Because governments still take the safe and conservative stance that B40 is the one that need the most help. M40, you can survive on your own. T20, you guys are rich people. We do not need to help you much. They are still going for the stereotype kind of mindset, which this does not necessarily the case. Yes, Masha.
So are we saying or are we like understanding that this budget is not that inclusive?
For me, yes, it does not that inclusive. Actually, not only for this budget, even for other packages, whether it's Prihatin or whichever stimulus packages, including for last year budget, in the sense that to help B40 category, you wouldn't face any backlash.
Yeah.
And the excuse to be given of not helping the T20 is this group of people, they are rich enough, which I do not think so. If you realize from this budget, you rarely hear the voices of people asking for EPF or KWSP withdrawal. You rarely hear people pushing for bank moratorium. The simple reason is because the oppositions was part of the one that helped to draft the budget. So they couldn't shoot back on their foot. At the same time, if you realize some of UMNO leaders who used to be rebellious and so on, right, they also become quite passive nowadays. The reason is very simple. If you don't support the budget, let it be. I don't need your votes. I have enough votes from the opposition from Pakatan Harapan. So in the end of the day, this budget, I would say that it's more towards political calculations rather than whether this budget, is it a good budget, is a bad budget. For me, in order to help N40 and T20, this group of people, actually, it's not that they don't have money. They do have money. Just that the money that they have is something that they cannot use. For example, when you talk about B40 category, they really need cash injection. And a small sum of cash injection can really help their life. For example, a few hundreds or 1,000, 2,000 can really help their life very much, can really help to solve their economy crisis. But for M40 and T20, even you're going to give them cash injection, you're going to give them 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, it wouldn't be enough. So cash injection is not a good way to do. But does it mean that you do not need to help them? Not necessarily. They have the money, but they couldn't use the money. What do I mean by that? They have the money in KWSP or EPF. They have the money in terms of loan installment. But these are the money that they cannot utilize. If the government is willing to open up this space for them to utilize this money that cannot be utilized, it can actually help them to overcome back their life. Remember, a lot of government policies or a lot of government subsidies is really can help the B40 category, but does not necessarily mean that they can help M40 and T20. For example, wage subsidy. All right, they have give you a cap on how much the government is going to help to subsidize the salary of the workers. And don't forget, if you're in T20 or you're in upper M40, you definitely exceed the cap or the maximum ceiling. So will the company still willing to hire you in the sense of they have to even cover more? Therefore, for this category of people, government should think of another way on how to help their life, on how to help them to solve their problem. Of course, I believe this group of category of people, they never expect cash injection from the government. Practically, it couldn't happen. How much you need to inject? But the thing is, you can come up with non-monetary policy. Non-monetary policy, like what we discussed just now, bank moratorium, all this thing. Is this something that cannot be done? I wouldn't say it is something that cannot be done. It depends on political will. No doubt, somebody will suffer. For example, if you give bank moratorium, bank will suffer. So the debate will be, is it justifiable for the bank to suffer, to have less profit, or we should focus on to help this M40 20 people? Same to KWSP withdrawal. Should we consider the profit margin by KWSP or by EPF, or should we consider the suffering of this group of people? Of course, the debate can be whether, because this is post-retirement money, you shouldn't use it. What if I can help you to solve the post-retirement crisis? Meaning, they withdraw money today, they wouldn't affect their post-retirement life. Will the government agree to it? So these are the things that the budget itself, they try not to hit on with the problem itself. Yes, they come up with the solution, but the solution does not necessarily mean to hit on with the problem that people face. They are just generalize it.
So I think what Dr. Lau is trying to say, what I believe I understood is that we have all these layers of society that have different needs. So to address their needs, we need different stimulus packages. We need different plans, right?
Correct.
Dr. Lau?
I agree. And furthermore, I understand that we have to be balanced between government financial ability and the help that they can be given to others. Therefore, I'm not suggesting for something that is related to forcing the government to pump in more money. But actually, they can use non-monetary policies. That's number one. Number two, if you look at the budget, there are a lot of places where they spend money, and those money does not necessarily need to be spent nowadays. But due to political reason, they have to spend the money in that way. Just like what we have discussed just now, it's more to conservative planning or conventional practice that they follow from the past. Every year they do it like that. By status quo, they have to do it. If not, they're going to face political backlash. This is something that under this difficult time, you have to make a damn move. And the damn move that does not necessarily mean that you're going to sideline these people. Yes, for this year, you are going to sideline them, but in the future, you can compensate them back. In short means that in the future, in the long run, they wouldn't suffer any kind of decline. Just that they're not going to enjoy the benefit for these few years, but in the future, the government can promise, hopefully the promise can be fulfilled. The government can promise to recompensate them back. So in this way, the budget can really hit on with the current problem, and at the same time, they can take care of the needs or whatever the government owe you for these few years. In the future, they compensate you back. So I believe everybody can be agreed to that.
All right, that was so insightful, Doctor. Thank you so much. And with that, before we keep the heat up and running, we'll be taking a short break. Stay tuned with Political Insights and our discussion on the budget 2022.
Video ke? So, penguatan Political Insight behind the scenes. Dari PEC. PR, General Manager, yang terbesar. Saya nak main game Naruto. Suruh dia masuk. Dah boleh. Busy. Tak. Sebab aku tak boleh. Tak apa tadi kita tanya audience jawab.
Kan apa-apa Umi nak inform you juga ke, will use private search
Sudah dimasa tak panik.
going live in 3, 2, 1
you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and welcome to Political Insights, 40 minutes of political knowledge. I am Ilya Marsha, your host for tonight, and thank you for tuning in for our second episode. It's Story Radio, our political student friend. So let us go to our first politics.
And the what we call the demand from the outside, then it will be a problem. They come up with any statement. But the issue, what I'm trying to say is that the issue, I want to share with you what has been done, the culture of intellectualism among the students, and also to empower the student standard in the campus.
So, as we are currently in the second half of the semester, I hope that everyone is doing great and fine and still riding the momentum to finish through the semester.
Cannot hear.
Sorry. Okay. Welcome back to Political Insights. We are currently navigating the 2022 budget with Dr. Lau from the Department of Political Science. So, before we ended with our commercial break just now, what maybe we can discuss on which budget is not necessarily to be spent right now. So, Dr. Lau, please proceed with your insightful views on this topic.
Because like what we have discussed just now is more to the principal level. Maybe for this section, we can try to go into the details of it. Now, for sure, whatever I discuss later, it will be quite controversial. A lot of people will be unhappy with that. But no worries, I'll think of a way how to compensate back the money that I suggest not to be spent now. For example, the purpose of the budget for this year is to help to recover the economy. So all the resources, it should be spent on only to recover the economy. It's not about appreciation. It's not about something that when you spend it, you couldn't utilize the value of the money, or you do not need to utilize the value of the money yet. All right. For example, maybe I give myself as an example first, something that's not good for myself. Government is paying 700 ringgit to civil servants. Yeah, I'm getting it. I agree. Do I like it? I like it. But if I think about it in a more rational way, civil servants has been getting consistent salary without being affected compared to other industry. All right. So these 700 in a last whole, we don't talk about isolated cases where they need to feed their family and so on. We talk about the general only on civil servants. These 700 ringgits does not really help them much, except as a bonus, as an appreciation. So what the government can do is take away this kind of bonuses, but with the promise that in the future, the government will compensate it back. Meaning now I don't give you first, maybe 5 years later, whatever that I'm supposed to give you by then, I give you plus a 700 ringgit, or even by bonus plus 1,000 ringgit. So by then, the direction of the government is no longer about recovering the economy, because the economy by then is already stable. So you can compensate it back. But of course, whether the people or the civil servant can trust the government, that's another story. Because if they couldn't trust you that you can compensate it back, you're going to face a lot of backlash. But if you can convince the people to trust you and convince the people that you wouldn't suffer any losses in the long run, meaning whatever you don't get it for today, you're going to get it doubled in the future, I feel that it is a way to go. And for example, another example, they are giving 100 ringgit to the teachers for the PDPR, for online home learning and teaching, all these things. I agree, teacher has spent money onto that. But don't forget, money that has already been spent. So this 100 basically is to compensate them back so that they wouldn't spend their own money to buy all the apparatus, all these things. Meaning to compensate them back so that they don't use their money. But the money is spent. Meaning the 100 ringgit wouldn't really, because of without the 100 ringgit, teacher will suffer more. So again, this 100 ringgit can be owing them, meaning in the future, I'm going to compensate you back or even more. And this money can be directed towards the economic developmental process. Another example, the allocation to education to schools, to Chinese I mean, national type school, and definitely they have to have a portion for vernacular school and so on, including for religious institution, including for social institution, all these things. Does all this activity, number one, is it a desperate need that without the money, the school is going to collapse? If yes, then yes, provide the money that is very desperately in need, provide it first. If it is not in need, we drag it first, drag it as long as we can. Not because we don't want to give you the money, but the money can be spent on other places. All right. Again, in the future, you can promise them and to compensate them back. So in another way for this budget, what the government should do is to give a lot of owing, to owe a lot of people of what they are not getting it. In the future, compensate it back. By then, you're going to have a bigger sum of money to pump it back to recover back the economy. For today, right, I don't discuss about whether is it over pessimistic to have their forecast, whether is it good to have deficit, all these things, because this will be another long debate. But let's assume all this aside, meaning the same revenue that we have. So I believe that's the way on how the government should utilize the revenue instead of following the conventional way. But trust me, if the government going to implement my way, surely they will face a lot of political backlash. If you don't give allocation to vernacular school, you're going to face backlash from Chinese society or from Indian society. If you don't give allocation to religious institution like Islam-based institution, you're going to face backlash from the Muslim community. If you don't give bonuses to the civil servants, you'll get an uproar from the civil servants, the whole group. So I understand that this group will definitely voice out their displeasure. So what the government need to do is be brave enough, do the correct thing at the correct time, instead of doing a thing based on conventional practice, based on the conservative method, because now it is a difficult time, so we should use different method instead of the status quo method. Yes, please.
So I think we have covered a lot. So I do have one thing in mind when we heard about Dr. Lau and saying that some places that it's not necessary to be spent now because the money that we have spent has already been spent. And what we can do now is to compensate them at a later date or maybe next year when we have like enough money to compensate them. So I do have one more question that I think that we think that are quite related to this. So based on the National Budget 2022, the development expenditure of East Malaysia has actually seems lesser than the provisions from other communities. Hence, I think this is quite related to some of the money has been spent to some other places that is not necessary to be spent. So, what is your comments on this?
Maybe before going into these questions, I clarify a little bit on the previous discussion. What I mean is the government need to know why they give such allocations. They give such allocation is to help the in-need society. For example, they are giving 100 ringgit to teachers to help teachers in terms of their life. They are giving 700 ringgit to help civil servants, or the money is just a man of appreciations. So this is two different things. So the government have to be clear why you spend the money for that purpose. Only then you can understand whether is it should or shouldn't spend it now. If you say that no, because without the 100 ringgit, without the 700 ringgit, they will suffer, then yes, go ahead to give. But if it's more to appreciations, I believe it can do it in the future. Back to your question on that. On this topic, it comes back to the idea of West Malaysian versus East Malaysian. One of the member of parliament, honestly, I forget who already, there are two. One of them suggested that we should allocate the developmental expenditure 50% for West Malaysia, 25% for Sabah, 25% for Sarawak. Because if you realize from what our previous Prime Minister, Tan Sri Muhyiddin, and even current one, they acknowledge that this Sabah and Sarawak, they are considered as a region. It's not as a state. Back to our Malaysian Agreement 1963. Meaning the whole Malaya or the whole peninsula is one unit. Sabah is one unit. Sarawak is one unit. So technically, everything should be divided by 1/3, and it's not by 1/13. So one of the member of parliament suggested 25, 25, 50. Yeah, political propaganda. If I'm a Sarabahan or Sarawakian politician, I'll go for that as well. but it's not realistic enough. Another member of parliament suggested something quite realistic is he's not asking for much. He's just asking for 10% of the overall, which is not impossible, which is possible. Depends on political will. I know that you're going to reduce the expenditure from the West Malaysian. Definitely, because it is a zero-sum game. You give somebody more, you're going to give somebody less. But the question is, until when you're going to use the excuse that West Malaysian need more money, need to spend more money compared to the East Malaysian? Like it or not, there must be a point that you have to spend, you need to willingly spend more money towards the East Malaysian. Of course, I understand that the government calculations, even by economic calculation, is you spend RM1 into West Malaysian, especially developed states like Selangor, like Kuala Lumpur, this thing, the revenue that you're going to get it from the RM1 might be higher compared to you spend RM1 in a rural area. I agree with that calculations. But in practice, if you don't start to give RM1, how is Sabah and Sarawak going to start to achieve a level where they can give you back similar, if not the same, at least similar revenue? So it's more to political will on to what extent you need or you're willing to pump in money to that. Whether now is the correct time or not, well, I would say that for this budget, we shouldn't look at the political considerations, meaning whether should give to Sabah or should give to Sarawak or to give to Peninsula Malaysia. We should go for the objective of it, recovery. If they need it for recovery, give it. If they do not need it yet, then don't give it. But in the future, sooner or later, the federal government should really consider to give a reasonable and a willingness sum of budget towards Sabah and Sarawak. By the way, there's a disclaimer first. I'm not a Sabahan, I'm not a Sarawakian. But I believe that sooner or later, the government needs to do it. Maybe you don't do it now, I can understand, if you have a lot of constraint due to the pandemic. But sooner or later, you really need to start the first step. If you are using the same discourse until the end, until 50 years later, so this kind of disparity will continue.
I think if the government is to continue what they are doing now, this this question will still linger on until 50 years or so, right, Dr. Lau? Like, if we don't change, okay.
Because for me, right, these questions, maybe my background is political science, so I look at it from political science perspective. This thing has a lot to do with the number itself of member of parliaments. If you do not need to rely on them, you wouldn't care about them. If you need their numbers, you will put more money to them. That's why if you realize, recently, these few years, the best time for Sabah and Sarawak to push for or push harder for this kind of MA63. The reason is very simple. You don't give it to me, I don't give you my number. And I give my number to somebody willing to give it to me. So this is one of the best opportunity for Sabah and Sarawak to demand. Of course, the demand have to be reasonable in the sense of you looking at the overall pictures. But at the same time, federal also have to be fair enough in the sense of these two are part of our states as well. If you realize on a lot of countries, right, sometimes they prefer to focus their development onto a certain area only. For example, you go to, okay, maybe I don't mention the country lah. You go to one of the most less developed country. Their city, where all the leaders gathered, you have all the best facilities over there. I just give you the country, like, easier for you to imagine. North Korea. Pyongyang actually have a lot of good facilities, everything's over there. Because they pump in all the money over there. But look at out of Pyongyang, it's totally, a sky and a ground kind of difference. So I believe that as a developing country like Malaysia, as a country that's democratically enough to recognize the people from all the places within Malaysia, it is a time for us, even it means that the investment may not come back to the equal or high revenue, we should do it. We should do it. Because anyhow, Sabah and Sarawak is part of Malaysia.
So it's important for us to focus on Sabah and Sarawak too, because we need to standardize the development. Not only East Malaysia but West Malaysia we need to rise together and develop and also recover after the post COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that's some of our key points based on what Dr. Lau has said. But we are taking yet another break to restart, refresh, and stay tuned with us at Political Insights, 40 minutes of political knowledge. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Tunggu. Video ke? So, perbuatan Political Insight behind the scenes. Jadi, PR, satu manager, host yang terbesar. Saya nak main game Naruto. Suruh dia masuk. Dah boleh. Busy. Tak. Sebab aku tak biasa dengan
Tak, ini
aku nak cakap apa tadi soalan.
For our interest, for our
Ini dia. Kita tanya audience jawab.
You forget apa-apa Umi nak inform you juga tu, use private search.
Sudah di masa tak panik.
Going live in 3, 2, 1, cue.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and welcome to Political Insights, 40 minutes of political knowledge. I am Ilya Marsha, your host for tonight, and thank you for tuning in for our second episode. This is very renowned political student friend. So let us welcome our first politics.
and the what we call the demand from the outside, then it will be problem. So come up with any statement. But the issue, what I'm trying to say is that the issue, I want to share with you what has been done, like the culture of intellectualism among the students, and also to empower the student standard in the campus.
So as we are currently in the second half of the semester, I hope that everyone is doing great and fine and still riding their momentum to finish through the semester.
Welcome back to Political Insights. We are currently navigating the 2022 budget with Dr. Lau from the Department of Political Sciences. So thank you for staying with us. Let us proceed with the next question. So recently, Doctor, a politician has made a statement that the government is only focusing on the expenditure of the national budget solely for the recovery of COVID-19 rather than regenerating the revenue in the long run. So moreover, an economy expert also stated that the national budget will not be efficient in achieving some goals for the next 3 to 5 years. So what is your take on that, Doctor?
This personally I do not agree much, because for me in this budget, the government has started to recognize the elephant in the room. Actually, for us, right, there are a lot of places, a lot of revenue that can give the government a kind of source of income. Just that the government do not really have a firm kind of intention to get those income. I give you a few examples. Number one, for those who are doing businesses physically, of course, they are subject to the taxes. But what about those online businesses? So these are the places where it become a gray area. And the government, they recognize it, they notice it, but they don't really come out with a way on how to do taxation on that. Or they're not firm in terms of their implementation or execution. So this is the time where the government started to say that online businesses subjected to tax as well. Of course, on this point, I believe the government also have to be reasonable in the sense of those small businesses, you don't expect too much from them, and you also don't enforce the law onto them. But in a reasonable scale of businesses, government can tax them and should tax them. And these are the things that government has left out, where now they're trying to get back revenue from that. Second one, for incomes that you gain it from out of Malaysian, but you receive the money in Malaysia. Meaning money that you earn it from overseas, but you get it from Malaysia, especially those online profit and so on. Now, government started to tax it. Is it reasonable? For me, yes, because it's a source of income. Of course, if I'm the one who gain the income, I'm also not happy to be taxed, to be honest. But if you look at it rationally, should or shouldn't, we took it from the moral perspective. It should, it is fair. So I believe that this budget, government has already started to coming out with a lot of reasonable, they started to recognize those elephants in the room and tackle those issues and started to gain money from that. For the short term, of course, some of the measures are quite short term. For example, the PTPTN discounts, which for me is a good thing. It's a good thing for short term generation of income. The reason is they are giving that discount. If you are in the category where you can afford, of course you want the discount. It's good for you. At the same time, it is good for government to get a sum of money in one-off. For example, another example, the controversial one will be the 33% of tax for businesses above 100 million. I believe this will be going to create a long debate. A lot of people, especially those economists, will say that no, it's not a good thing for Malaysia and so on and so forth. My take is totally the opposite. All this while, in a lot of economic crisis in Malaysia, the government rarely squeeze the money out of this industry. Even though you're earning a lot, the government rarely unfairly or suppressionally squeeze the money from industries. And this will be among the first time for the government to do it. Will it cause the less of confidence within the investor? I would say that if the investor is a short-term investor, meaning short-sighted investor, yes, they're going to affect them. They might run away in the sense of, well, I'm going to do business over here for 5 years. And one of the year, you're going to tax me 33%. But for long run, 33% only for 1 year, if you can believe, you can trust the government, only for 1 year, in long run, it wouldn't really affect you much. Provided you can trust the government that they wouldn't repeat this kind of action in the future. Can we trust them? I would say that up to this moment, right, Malaysian government have been quite fair. Even though under economic crisis, we do not really squeeze money from industries unfairly. So this may be among the first few times. So if you consider the track record of Malaysian, I do not believe that long-sighted investor will run away. Of course, one of the argument is the collapse of our share market. Not collapse, but a decline, a force of the share percentage and so on. Let's be honest, be practical. Whenever you have economy new policy like that, whenever you have political instability, whenever you have something that out of the status quo, meaning you have some changes towards the system itself, be it governmental system, political system, economic system, for sure you're going to have kind of like adjustment in the share market. This is very common. But in long run, if you can coming back and adjust by the market, I do not feel there's a problem. You realize this is not something that unusual, unless after having this policy, government cannot reconvince the investor or foreign direct investor that this is a one-off thing. If you can convince them and you can show them that in the future, you can think of a way to compensate them back, I don't feel there's a problem. Because Malaysian current biggest problem is we need money now, at least now for short term. So as long as you can get the money now for short term, things in the future, you can think of another way, another policy to recompensate it back to those who were affected.
So when you said that the government has addressed the elephant in the room, I believe another big elephant that we have now is, the unemployment issue. So how far do you think that this budget will help in resolving the unemployment issue that is one of the key factors that influence Malaysia's economy, Dr. Lau?
Actually, on this point, right, which even happened on last year, what I suggested is sometimes, of course, the government can create jobs, all these things. But how many jobs can you create? So when we talk about the whole economy market, as long as you let the economy market to run on its own, to coming back to recover on its own, the government does not need to pump in a lot of money, a lot of physical money into the market. The thing is, can you let the economy cycle recover? So this back to the idea of whether the market itself can start their cycle, whether people have money or willing to use the money to spend. So this is the time where personally, I would encourage, even from last year, I would encourage that government make sure that people have money to spend. Meaning, you allow those money that couldn't be spent before this to be able to be spent now. Two way, the conventional way, is bank moratorium and EPF withdrawal. Of course, when we talk about this thing, right, we also need to have safeguard in the sense of you couldn't randomly let people withdraw EPF. If not, later on, they have post-retirement issues. If there's a problem, deal with that. So what I suggested recently, a few months ago, was for those, especially on M40 and T20, if you can afford to withdraw the money and you can guarantee that you can replenish back the money before you retire, why not? Because at the end of the day, it wouldn't affect retirement life. Based on my very rough calculations, 1 month worth of salary, you withdraw it from KWSP, you need about 15 months to replenish it back, to replace it back. So in another words, if you're going to withdraw maybe in total from last time to today, you withdraw 6 months, meaning you need about 19 months to replace back the money that you withdrew, about 7 to 8 years. So maybe you can make a rules. Those above 52 years old, we assume retirement is 60. Those above 52 years old, you are not allowed to withdraw. Those below, you can, because you can recover it back. So when they withdraw the money, they are going to spend the money into the market. If your problem is no, they withdraw, not necessarily they're going to spend, then make a ruling. You cannot withdraw cash, hard money. You can only withdraw spending voucher. Then you're forcing them to withdraw. So let them to decide, do you need or do you not to need? So for me, is not necessarily the government have to interfere into the cycle of the market, because the market itself actually can self-recover. The only thing is how to let the market to self-recover, is to make sure that the economy itself can run on its own without much interference from the government. So how to do it? Make sure people can spend, the economic cycle can start on. Yes, that's
All right. So thank you so much. That marks the last question of the night. So we have discussed many insightful aspects of the budget 2022, and we have heard that there should also be adjustments to it so it could also benefit us in the long run. And I have gained a lot from this, as there has also been many points that we have focused on where it would benefit us here at Political Insights. So, Marsha?
So, special thanks to our guest tonight for his willingness to share his time and insights with us. I just have before we end, Dr. Lau, do you have anything to say and maybe some hopes for the future of Malaysia or your expectations of the budget?
Yes, actually I do. A very short one, in the sense that although I criticize this budget a lot because this is not a perfect budget, but I do recognize that this budget is not that bad. Just that there are room for improvement for this budget to be more inclusive.
That is great to hear. We hope that the government will try to improve their budget based on our life today. Maybe some public opinion will play its role. So thank you to Dr. Lau for his insights, and thank you to our audience for staying tuned with us until this far. We just have a quick announcement to make. So starting from episode 3, Political Insights will be streaming live on every Sundays and not Wednesdays anymore. So if you're keen to know more about politics, don't forget to stay tuned with us every Sunday onwards. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and follow IIM Today on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, and LinkedIn. So until next time in Political Insights, 40 minutes of political knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.